Every year, billions of dollars are allocated through Jamaica's national budget. But the budget isn't just about the government, it's about all of us. These decisions shape everything from the cost of living to job opportunities to the kind of life that we're inheriting as young people. So today on Common Ground, we're asking a simple question. What does Jamaica's budget actually mean for young people? I'll be speaking with economist and executive director of the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, Dr. Damian King, to break down the key takeaways, and then we'll hear directly from young Jamaicans on what mattered most and what resonated most with them. I'm your host, Danielle Mullings. Let's find common ground. Dr. King, it's a pleasure to have you here on the show. How are you doing?
It's great to be here. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Amazing. So I'm going to go straight into it, Dr. King. I did watch your presentation last week, and of course you had that interview with the Minister of Finance as well. We're talking about the budget debate today. What would you say are the top 3 takeaways coming out of the budget debate?
Okay, before I do that, let me just say what a great introduction that was, because if people recognized how much the decisions that are embodied in the budget affected their lives, everybody would pay attention to it.
Very true.
Because it interfaces with people's lives in so many different ways, both the expenditure choices and the tax choices. Not to mention that the minister announced new taxes. It's your money. Right. You really want to know what you're doing with it.
Coming out your pockets.
And if it's the right choices. So, great start. The key takeaways. Well, in this case, it's actually quite straightforward. Hurricane Melissa was a big lick. I started the presentation that you say you listened to last week. By the way, it's Capri's budget breakdown.
Right.
And it's on YouTube, so you can go to Capri's YouTube channel, Capri Caribbean. By pointing out that, you know, when people tell you how much damage was done, it comes to like 12 billion US dollars. The big number means nothing.
Right.
So to make it more real, consider this. The amount of value that was destroyed in the space of a few hours, one afternoon in October, is equal to half of the entire value of what all of us produced for a year.
Wow.
So it did a lot of damage. And so as you would expect, the key takeaway from the budget is going to be, how is the government managing that? How much is it going to affect our lives going forward because of how it affected the government's accounts?
Right.
And correspondingly, it affected the government's accounts in a significant way. The government had to spend about, I'm rounding generously here, but over the course of last fiscal year, well, we're still in March, this fiscal year, and the one that starts in a couple of days, starts in April, the government will have to have spent about 100 billion Jamaican dollars. And the revenue loss, because so much of the economy was destroyed, is another $100 billion. So about 200 billion Jamaican dollars is what it cost. Clearly, it means people are going to have to pay for that somehow.
Right.
The government is not carrying that in its bank account that it can just draw upon. So therefore, all of which is to say, one key unexpected takeaway is that everybody has to pay more taxes. Don't bawl about it. Because you do want a government that's going to, as much as possible, tax its way to cover its bills rather than start accumulating debt again. Another key takeaway is that one of the taxes that it chose to impose is one that has been discussed for a long time, which is taxing the sugar in beverages, in non-alcoholic beverages. And that's going to affect young people, it turns out, because young people is a key part of the market for soft drinks and other non-alcoholic beverages and juices and so on. So, the relative prices are going to be changing of the things that you consume. So when you go to the shop, just remind yourself of what the price it looks like now, so that you can choose less drinks that have less sugar in it.
So, Dr. King, you've mentioned the impact of Hurricane Melissa, which we all felt and knew would be something coming for this national debate. So what are some of those areas then that the government is focusing its spending as we look at recovery?
Well, it has to be focused. There are 3 aspects of government spending, when you have a hurricane or any natural disaster. And that is reconstruction, relief, and recovery. So you have to you have to fix the roads and build back the bridges. You need to provide emergency relief to people who are most affected by it. And then you have to engage with policies that is going to help the economy to recover as quickly as possible. So that's what they are doing. But a pretty important aspect of what government does when you have a disaster like this is how does government prepare itself for disasters?
Right.
And Jamaica was in a really good position because the government had taken out insurance, literal insurance. They pay premiums every month, and when the hurricane lick, they can collect it from a CARICOM agency set up for that.
CRIF.
And CRIF. And they also had a really clever instrument called a catastrophe bond. And essentially, they get global investors to agree to get a monthly payment from the government. And if during the term of this catastrophe bond, no hurricanes of a sufficient level hit the island, the investors get to keep the premiums. But if a hurricane comes along, then the investors are obligated, according to the terms of the agreement, to give us a whole pile of money to pay for some of the damage. And it's a good thing we had that in place because the hurricane did hit and the government got a lot of money out of it.
So what do you think are some ways that we can build on that? So we've had this, amazing, financing mechanism that we put in place. But I heard you mention in your presentation as well that it's not enough.
It wasn't enough. So when you look at the structure of the different things the government had,
right.
you have the catastrophe bond, you have the insurance. The government also has, let's call them savings accounts that are just for when disasters hit. So the makeup, the structure of these, of this, what you call the disaster fund, the disaster architecture was good, but the amounts were not enough for a Melissa scale of impact. I mean, the amounts basically came to less than 25% of what it cost the government, of the $200 billion it cost the government. So what the government needs to do now is it needs to rebuild that, take out a new insurance policy, issue a new catastrophe bond, but to do it in larger amounts.
Right.
And that means higher premiums, higher payments to the cat bondholders, more money in the disaster funds, and we are going to have to pay for that. We are going to have, if the government is increasing its expenditure, then it has to get that from us. But we want to do that and we want to support it because there will be another Melissa and we don't want it to upend all our lives to a greater degree than the last one did.
Really good points. And I think another area that you mentioned as well is that it's not just Melissa. We're in a turbulent time in terms of geopolitics, one.
Right.
Two, we've come through the pandemic. There's been instability economically for a while now at a global level, and these are things that we have to prepare for overall.
I'm glad you mentioned that. So we regularly get smacked by hurricanes. There have been 8 named storms since independence, and that works out to about 1 every 6 years, which is pretty frequent. In addition to that, we've had the pandemic, we had the 9/11 disaster, we have had American trade policy upending global trade, we have wars breaking out, and so the small Caribbean islands end up being vulnerable to and affected by not just natural disasters, but economic shocks as well.
Right.
So we need to pay a lot of attention to being fiscally resilient.
And I want to build on that because I think, listening to the debates, we're hearing two different stories. The government is saying that the economy is improving, we're doing well, and the opposition is kind of saying that, the people aren't feeling it. It's not reaching where it most matters. How do we make sense of that? It's kind of hard to be able to tell what is true, what's factual. Where do we stand?
So, all through history, in every country that has a nod to being a democracy, the incumbent administration will always say things are either going well or improving, and the opposition will always say that things are terrible. So you can't pay too much attention to those narratives.
Right.
But the reality is this, or at least an important perspective of the reality is this, that the Jamaican economy had been really badly managed since independence up to about 12 years ago. Badly managed meant they underinvested in infrastructure. So we weren't expanding the road infrastructure. We didn't manage inflation well. So the inflation rate would often be 10%, 20%, 30% per year. In 1 year, it was all over 80%. there was no preparation, there was no structure, there was no stack of different protections for hurricanes. Every time a hurricane hit, it came like a surprise and government had to find money for it. And it ran fiscal deficits and accumulated a lot of debt owed by the government. Starting about 12 years ago, when Peter Phillips was finance minister, there was a commitment to improve fiscal management. Jamaica started having balanced budgets, which means the government was not spending more than it was earning in tax revenue. And this was crucial, and we've maintained that except for the years of the pandemic. That has allowed the public debt, the amount of money government owes and therefore we owe, to come down by more than half, down to a level now where it's manageable, it's sustainable, it's not alarming. We have invested as a country in infrastructure. That's why highways are being built. We see much better management of monetary policy. So there's an inflation target now of about 5% per year, which the Bank of Jamaica has been able to stick to, again, except for the pandemic. All of which is to say that the governments, the administrations, through two administrations now, and the central bank, the Bank of Jamaica, has so improved economic policy management that Jamaica now has a platform with low and stable inflation, with low debt, with investment in infrastructure, and lots of improvements behind the scenes in institutional quality. Jamaica, for the first time since independence, has a platform on which investors can have some confidence. Notice the rate of exchange rate depreciation has now slowed down considerably. And so there's a platform now that investors can start to think about what's a good business to go into. How do I want to make that investment? Rather than when we're going to have the next big devaluation, or when is the government going to default on debt, or when is inflation going to be 30%. Businesses don't have to think about that anymore. So we have a platform for strong economic growth. The economic growth hasn't started yet.
Okay.
So that is that's the nuance.
Thank you, Dr. King. And my final question to you, maybe in about 30 seconds, if you could share with us, what should young people be looking out for over the next year or 2 years to see if this budget is working and has worked?
Well, so the budget working really means that the government's assumptions turn out to be right, and its estimates for expenditure and revenue turn out to be right. So the Ministry of Finance regularly reports on the amount of revenue coming in, because what you really don't want is for the government's estimate of expenditure and revenue to be wrong in a negative direction, that it ends up spending more than it promised and getting less revenue than it forecasted, and then so the government ends up having to borrow more money again. So basically, young people should be looking to, one, that the budget was a sincere budget and that things are working that way, and secondly, given the new stability that we have, what are the ways that you can start a small business and help yourself with a little forward-looking perspective?
Makes sense. Thank you so much, Dr. King. You've shared some excellent points with us. Ladies and gentlemen listening at home, thank you so much for joining us. We've had Dr. Damian King, who is the Executive Director of Capri, sharing the key takeaways for us from the budget debate. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Common Ground. Welcome back to Common Ground. I'm your host, Danielle Mullings. Now we're continuing this discussion about the national budget debate. And before we go any further, we asked young people across Jamaica what stood out to you the most from this year's budget debate. Here's what they said.
What stood out to me the most about the budget debate is that the government will be eliminating tuition fees for arts courses up to level 5.
One of those issues was, how do we build resilient housing in the context of a country that's in a major natural disaster zone? And then the second is, how do we provide sufficient affordable housing, particularly for young people who are trying to enter the residential market? Unfortunately, while we did hear some proposals about how to deal with these issues, and we heard some proposals about what will be done in the coming fiscal year, I think there's still a lot more that needs to be done, and I do think that this issue should be treated as a national emergency. Perhaps it's time that we start to think about housing as physical capital, like bridges, schools, hospitals, roads, etc.
What stood out to me from the budget debate is a heavy emphasis that the government is placing on the financial recovery of Hurricane Melissa. This hurricane approximately cost $198 billion according to Capri. And so one of the things that really had me pondering is that the government has introduced new tax after a period of 8 to 10 years of no new taxes. But I do believe that this is a smart move, as this new tax is a great idea to generate income, but also it also promotes healthy consumption habits, as it is a tax on sugary drinks.
Those are real experiences and perspectives being shared from our young people, which we must pay attention to. Now we're going back in studio, where we're joined by Ashley Robinson, who's the incoming curator, and of course David Welch as well, the incoming impact officer of the Global Shapers Kingston Hub. Now, guys, you first have to tell me, what does Global Shapers Kingston Hub mean?
Well, the Global Shapers, as you said, is an initiative of the World Economic Forum. We do impactful projects, bringing together several people from all over the world to help improve society. Some projects that we've worked on are like MEND or blood drives, just trying to help the overall community to improve.
Amazing. So tell me, when you watched the budget debate, what stood out to you the most? Let's start with David.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so when watching the budget debates, I realized, just based on my observation and a lot of things that were said, that most of the conversations revolved around the government trying to achieve some level of macroeconomic stability based on, given the impetus of the Hurricane Melissa. And, this actually caused us to incur losses of up to $12.2 billion dollars to the country's economy. That's essentially 57% of our GDP. So, it's very fair that the government would look from a point of view of trying to come up with alternatives to see how we can become more resilient and facilitate resurgence, so that we can, bounce back from this and come out stronger. But they mentioned a lot of key points that I really took note of, especially I love the fact that they mentioned the whole idea of digital transformation, especially with, having more ease of transitions, especially with the new electronic system that they have with the tax administration. I think that's a step in the right direction in regards to making processes more efficient in Jamaica, because business processes can be pretty tedious in Jamaica and very paper-based. So I think it's a very good direction.
Thank you, David. And Ashley, what about you?
What I took from it more qualitatively is that we're being shaped by the numbers. Every conversation that we're having, even conversations you've had on Common Ground, can men be providers? Can women have children? The youth are being shaped exactly by what's being decided in the budget. So the amount of money they've allocated towards us being able to afford a home will decide how many babies are going to live in there. So we have to be cognizant as youth to what the numbers mean and how they're going to reflect into our daily budget, our cost of living, how many breads you're going to be able to buy this month,
Thank you both so much. I mean, Dr. King earlier in the first segment shared with us about how much, Hurricane Melissa is shaping our budget. It essentially is a response to the hurricane.
Definitely.
Do you guys think, in terms of what's in the budget, is there enough done for young people as we're in this build back, recovery and, reconstruction phase?
I think definitely. Thank you for that question. But in regards to how is it directly impacting young people, I believe that we're still definitely in a stage of recovery, and the budget tries its best to facilitate the young people in mind by looking at ways that we can, maximize on our allocations in different areas of the budget. For example, in education, in digital literacy. I like the fact that, it was mentioned that there were some initiatives to facilitate greater education opportunities and employment opportunities for young individuals, with the CARE program, the Bridge program, and the High Trust NSTA. But it's very crucial to really think, how will this transition, and in terms of having real value, how will young people achieve real value from this? Especially in employment. Yes, the government said that there's a reduction in unemployment, but are youth really getting access to jobs that they really find viable, that are really sustainable, with seeing the climate that we're currently existing in, with geopolitical tensions, increasing cost of living, increasing price levels overall. Are we really getting jobs or having opportunities that will allow us to be able to really afford basic standard of living?
I'm going to throw that question to you, actually, Ashley, because that's another one we wanted to explore, looking at this idea of opportunities and job creation. As you said, the government did highlight that we have lower unemployment. But from your perspective, are opportunities actually opening up for young people?
Well, maybe there are opportunities, but with artificial intelligence on the rise, taking away entry-level jobs, we're going to see that going down. As much as new opportunities are being faced, the truth is 80% of Jamaicans or young people have moved abroad, have migrated. So the reality is the people maybe they're not employed, maybe they're not unemployed, but they're underemployed. Most people will argue that they don't have enough money from a monthly paycheck to pay their bills. So we need to be realistic about what employment really means. It should mean quality of life.
So then what's missing when it comes to youth employment or entrepreneurship? Like, what should we be doing more of? You mentioned that, quite a few programs have been outlined by the government, and a lot of them can be life-changing for some young people, but what should there be more of?
Well, I think there should be more jobs directed in terms of where jobs that can facilitate us to have more of a globally competitive edge. For example, as Ashley would have mentioned, the world is heading in a very technology-based era where we're looking at AI potentially replacing jobs for of persons. So it's crucial to understand, are the educational opportunities that we're being presented with, the career opportunities, do these align with global standards or the direction that the world is heading with? Is our job going to become obsolete in the future? These are very critical things to consider, especially in the budget's allocation of resources.
So you're looking at that same concept of reskilling for the future.
Reskilling.
So the Global Shapers Kingston Hub actually has a project called Shaping Digital Futures, where we're working with the London Hub to actually provide 8 different programs reskilling youth between next July and May 2027, where we'll be partnering with institutions to teach young people exactly how to build AI tools to help their future.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Let's also look at housing, because this is a big focus in the budget and also a big focus from the young people who submitted videos in. What kind of, from your perspective, what would you say should be implemented to make owning a home as a young person feel realistic?
Okay, so I would recommend alternative solutions, like, for example, having maybe a rent-to-own kind of situation or strategy where they could have, for example, individuals, who are just, when you just get out of school, you just start working, you don't have a lot of money. So most times you just end up renting. You can't afford a mortgage. So maybe what the government could probably implement is to have persons be able to rent homes for a period of time, and then eventually over a course of 2 to 3 to 5 years or so, they could transition into paying on a mortgage, and then in the initial stages of the rent could be taken as a portion of it could be taken as equity. So this would provide a transitional phase for young people to enter from renting to home ownership.
All right, thank you, David. And Ashley, what do you think about this question as well? I liked what you mentioned earlier about how housing can be directly linked to persons wanting to start a family. You need a place to be able to house your family, right? What do you think on this issue?
I think the truth is, before the Hurricane Melissa, Gen Z are financial nihilists.
What do you mean by that? Well, tell the people.
Well, the truth is, we've always been a bit hesitant to invest in a future. I know more people that have been to Colombia 10 times versus putting a deposit on a home. It's just the belief that you won't have a future to invest in because of what's been happening to us. We had Corona, we have the recession, we have wars upon wars. What investment can I really make in a future? What home can I really have? And the truth is, the prices of homes are going up. Can I ever be able to afford a mortgage payment? No, but can I afford a trip to South America? Probably. The truth is, I think David is right. Rent to owning might be a viable solution, but the truth is we've been hesitant to even consider it as an option because of the financial infrastructure around us.
That's very interesting, and I think that's also some commentary that we've heard over and over from young people themselves saying, feeling that fear of the future, and can I actually build the future that I want to given these current economic situations. All right, thank you so much, David and Ashley. Viewers, we're so excited to have you with us. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Common Ground. I'm your host, Danielle Mullings, and we're continuing this conversation on the budget debate with David and Ashley from the Global Shapers Kingston Hub. Now, we kind of touched on this a bit before, but of course, cost of living is a huge factor that young people have been, talking about for years now. Do you think the budget did enough to address that?
I think they did it to their best of their abilities, based on the fact that a lot of the factors were based on just like resilience and overcoming, the impacts of the hurricane. Mm-hmm. But I think more could have been mentioned for sure. Guys, to like, how would it directly affect youth? What measures would be put in place in order for youth to be able to, see economically viable opportunities?
Thank you very much, David. And I want to ask you, Ashley, because I know you're quite passionate about this. The digital services tax has been a huge headline coming out of the budget debate. What did you think about that? And maybe if you can also tie in this idea about bureaucracy and inefficiency sometimes in our government systems that they've highlighted as a focus area to make our systems more efficient.
Well, the truth is that one way that youth are going to find themselves out of financial crisis is by entrepreneurship. More youth want to create financial products or any form of products that will help uplift them through owning their own things. Now, one way people do that is by opening a company. Try to go to company's office right now and open a business. I'll see how long it takes. The truth is we've always had a system of paper and we're trying to change that. But even with digital services and you having to work with Adobe or even a system like this, you want to have Spotify, you want to have Shopify in order to sell your products. That's going to be a hindrance, and it's already really difficult for young people to get a business home. It's much easier to get a car loan than it is to get a business loan. So we have to be realistic about the effects that it's going to have on young people. It's going to take some time, and of course we're going to need those taxes, as Mr. King said, in order to fix our economy. But the truth is we're going to take a heavy hit, and the bureaucracy is going to slow things down. I don't think it's going away immediately, but hopefully with a little bit of time we'll be able to work together in order to achieve some form of smooth system. I've never seen it, but I'm hoping.
And I believe it can happen. All right, so to close out, what is one thing from the budget debate that you think is heading in the right direction? Both of you. David.
Okay. So I think we're definitely on the right track in terms of achieving some level of economic stability, with inflation prices going down over the past period of time, and the government trying to, create new measures to ensure that we have disaster risk management and insurance available for future incidents like Hurricane Melissa's. So I think we're definitely on the right track with, staying in line.
Thank you, David. And Ashley?
The digital transformation, I think, is an amazing initiative by our government. I think if done right, if layered properly on top of systems that function, we can have an amazing, truly seamless system. So I think the government working in that way is great. I would like to see more efforts done in climate resilience. As much as there are different ministries that are now established towards that, we have to be realistic about the effects that it's having on our beaches, on the temperatures during the summer, on the rain and the cold front. We have to be realistic about what's happening in that segment. So I like that they're doing digital transformation. I want to see more efforts being put into climate.
Thank you so much, David and Ashley, for joining us here today. Young people, the budget isn't just about numbers. It's about all of us, and it's about the kind of future that we want to see. These conversations matter. They shape how we think, how we question, and ultimately how we move forward as a country. And the more young people lean into these spaces, is the stronger that future becomes. I'm your host, Danielle Mullings. Thanks for joining us here on Common Ground.